So now what do you do with Georgia? We were in the building yesterday for the SEC championship game. The final score, Alabama 27, Georgia 24. And when you look at Georgia, the question everyone's going to ask now is, well, are they a top 4 team in the country? And my answer to you is emphatically yes. Georgia is a top 4 team. We can look up and down this resume, look up and down the eye test for them, and you can, I think, pretty well deduce for yourself they're a top 4 team. Now, does that mean they're going to be a college football playoff team? By the time you're watching this, we may already have the college football playoff rankings, but I got my 2 cents I want to tell y'all here in just a second. First things first, though, make sure you're subscribed. Georgia fans had a lot of y'all join the party here recently. Regardless of what happens with the playoff committee, we got a lot to talk about here with what's going on with your dogs. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Also follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at JD Piquel. Tweet at me, DM me, let me know your case for your dogs going forward when it comes to the playoff. All right, so like I said, is Georgia a top 4 team? I feel like if you're actually just watching the football games, if you're just taking at face value what you see on that field, 11 on 11, I think you take Georgia over just about anybody else in the country. Now, that game against Alabama, yes, that's 100% a fair sample size to put forward and say, well, what about them? Yes, if they played again tomorrow, I think that line would be very, very close. I think the line would probably be somewhere around, within a field goal favoring Georgia or Bama. I don't know, but I think probably Bama made their case yesterday. Michigan and Georgia, also another really good game, probably a close line. But what I'm trying to say is, outside of those 2 teams, who else are you just picking outright over Georgia? Who else are you telling me outright is just a better football team than Georgia? And even in those 2 teams, I think it's a conversation. Even though Alabama, I think, won that game in a somewhat definitive fashion yesterday, the margins were still razor thin. And again, going back to what we said, look at what they've done this season. Like, resume is going to be a thing a lot of people say, and they don't have that conference championship logo or label, rather, on their resume. Still, beat 3 ranked teams all by 2 scores or more. They had top 10 in scoring as an offense and in points allowed per game as a defense. They also ran the entirety of their schedule in the SEC until the conference title game. So, there's something to be said for what Georgia's done this year. Now, I'm just telling you, I'm making my case here for them being a top 4 team. When it comes to the college football playoff, that's where it gets murky. Because when we have a 4-team college football playoff, what it's all about to me is it's about the water level. And last year, you had a team like TCU find their way into the college football playoff after losing their conference title game, much like Georgia did yesterday. But they still, again, made it in with 1 loss. Why? Because of what the rest of the college football playoff water level was. You had multiple loss conference champs in the ACC, in the Big 12, in the Pac-12. So the water level was a little bit lower. We were kind of looking for, hey, where are those teams with only 1 loss that maybe deserve a chance? Georgia, in last year's playoff, they're in. And it's not really a big discussion. We're not really holding our breath this morning about it. Now, this year, the water level with the college football playoff, much higher. 3 undefeated conference champs, 2 one-loss conference champs, one of which you just lost to yesterday in your conference title game. Georgia's a 1-loss team. I think there's a very, very real case to say they're the best 1-loss team in the country. Very real case. But going back to what we're talking about with this water level, with the water being that high in the college football landscape, the playoff landscape, there's 0 margin for error. It's unfortunate. It probably doesn't lend itself to actually finding out what the very best team is in the country if Georgia is left out. I think that's probably not considering the 4 best teams. 4 most deserving teams maybe, but what Kirby Smart said yesterday I think is on the money. If you're looking at these teams and you don't think Georgia's one of the best 4, I don't know what we're watching. So the reality here is Georgia lost the game you couldn't afford to lose. Even let's go back to the regular season. If Georgia had lost a game somewhere along the way, let's say they dropped that game to Missouri and still found their way to the SEC championship game and won the SEC with 1 loss, they're probably still in. It was the 1 loss in the title game that I think is ultimately going to cost them. Now, should it? It's a whole other conversation. But again, if you're telling me Georgia's not a top 4 team, I have a very big issue with that. The nature of the playoff right now and the way it looks right now, it's curious. Because I would also say this, if you were to tell me Georgia gets into the playoff, I'd still pick them to be a college football national champion. I still pick them to run the table and go all the way. In fact, I think a loss probably even motivates them going forward. And that's not me trying to hold Georgia's water here. I'm just telling you, by how good this team is, one bad performance is now defining them. And that's why we love college football, because the margins are so thin. So now where do we go for Georgia? Now let's just assume they don't make the college football playoff. What's next? Well, Georgia's not going anywhere. It'll probably be what we've seen from them the last couple of years. They'll lose some guys to the NFL, and there'll be some churn there, but we'll come back probably this time next year and expect Georgia to very much so be in this conversation. When it comes to a 12-team playoff, that game yesterday, the reality is it's for seeding. Okay, if we're playing with 12 teams, Georgia's in, and we're not even thinking twice about it this morning. So say what you will, but Georgia's going to keep recruiting well. They'll keep developing well. They still have, I think, the best coach in college football as of right now, even with that loss yesterday. The back-to-back national titles, I think, probably show that. But all that to say, what do you do with Georgia? They're a top 4 team, but I'd have a very, very difficult time seeing them make their way into the playoff this year. So we'll see what happens. If you're watching right now, maybe you've already figured out what the college football playoff rankings are. Maybe they've already been released. But regardless, make sure you subscribe. We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all next time. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.